How are you doing, Paul?
I'm good. I'm good. Just, learning to navigate this bizarre social landscape like everyone else.
Has it been hard on you though over the last year?
um, it's interesting. It like from a routine perspective, I would say no. Only because I live alone. I work primarily alone. And so, you know, I one might argue that I was positioned quite perfectly for a pandemic, but obviously, uh, almost immediately after the lockdown happened in March last year, like fashion essentially became irrelevant, unless, of course, you were into leisure sleepwear and athletics.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so we had to kind of pivot slightly. I mean, we, I had all the back end operation for an online shop organized, but we hadn't been very proactive in driving it. And so fortuitously, we had a lot of our fine gauge Italian knits, which seemed ideal for quarantining or self-isolation.
Cozy attire.
Yeah, self-isolation. We have some knitwear long john leggings, which I refer to as long john leggings, but they're sort of like luxe knitwear leggings. And those were quite popular. But it was interesting because I had a lot of receivables just prior to the pandemic. So financially, I was okay. And I had diversified into doing interior design back in 2008. And so I had these two revenue streams, in addition to some creative consulting I do for different corporations. And so there was just a shift, essentially. I mean, we still ended up, thankfully, making a profit last year, which we were planning on not doing. We thought if we broke even, that would be considered a gift, considering the economic times that we're in. But yeah. We managed to weather the storm. Very thankfully, a lot of people had been staying in their houses and focusing on their interiors as a result. And so quite serendipitously, we had a number of accounts come up during the lockdown.
No, absolutely. Home offices and just staring at those same walls, you're like, what can I do differently?
Yeah. And we, I have, just at the beginning of this year, we took on a few new larger scale projects, interior ones, that will last the next couple years.
Oh, wow.
So, and we decided to do that because with the uncertainty of retail and fashion. I know a lot of people are talking about that, it's going to be like the roaring 20s, once, and people are going to be on buying sprees again. I don't know. I'm undecided about that. I think after you experience like a lockdown that we've had, I think a lot of people rethink their, priorities, and
their spending habit.
Yeah, and I think until events, fundraising, performing arts, reasons to go out and actually be social, I don't see a lot changing. Maybe I'm not being very optimistic, but
No, you're totally right. I mean, if you ask the masses, they're holding on to their money. I was
yeah.
shocked to see people actually spend money on their homes, and then seeing the real estate market pick up. I said, "Holy smokes! Aren't people worried that what if tomorrow they don't have a job? Wouldn't you rather have cash in the bank?" But hey, apparently I was wrong there.
Well, I mean, I guess with interest rates being really low, and being able to get low mortgages in that respect, and a lot of people, if they were contemplating, like if they were in a condo situation and having to work from home, and not knowing when their workplace was going to reopen again. It may have spurred them to look at becoming a first-time homeowner, earlier than they had planned. But I think, when you own land and it's a bit of a buyer's market, I guess, it's probably not a bad time to buy.
Paul, where did you find this love and passion for design in all of this fashion?
Well, from the fashion side of things, my mother says that when I was 3 years old, I used to pull on her pant leg saying, "I want to sew, I want to sew." And so I think that, it was just a bit of an innate calling that way. But over the years, the last, say, 5 or 7 years, having done a lot of different creative collaborations with the ballet and the museum, and then with interiors, I think the common thread between all the different mediums is that I just enjoy being a visual storyteller, and that everything that I design, I try to have a reason behind it and an intention behind it, rather than it just being like a pretty
Right.
sort
So
of.
like your scarf, for example, would that be, does it speak to you? And what does it speak to you when you look at that?
Yeah, so, well, the scarf is from a collection of scarves that I design, and it's part of my Lamb's Laughter brand, which comprises of shearlings and knitwear and scarves. And the scarves were actually, the prints are all kaleidoscopic prints that are inspired by French taxidermy. So it uses the skeletal scientific prints, archival prints of sheep and all of their sort of parts. And it was to tie into the shearling collection, which are all made out of lamb skins. And those are all, like, we harvest them sustainably. They're all just a byproduct of the food chain. And so it was just a way to kind of create this narrative surrounding the whole brand.
Oh, it's beautiful. This is not live, so I was going to ask you, is this when I read it, it says sheep space. Is it supposed to say slaughter?
Oh, the name?
Yeah, like was there a play off on it? Like
it's sort of a play on words. Like, we call it Lamb's Laughter, but a lot of people read it as lamb slaughter. And our logo is actually a headless sheep. It's like this woodcut design of a headless sheep. And it's just this kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of, I'm sure all the vegans are gonna
I know, that's why I said, oh geez.
write me and horrific letters. But we produce everything in Istanbul, and our main reason for dealing with the Middle East is because lamb is such a staple to the Mediterranean diet. And so we were able to streamline the processes of, that everything is, sustainable.
And used, because I mean, the rendered products, they need to go somewhere instead of going to the waste and happy that you
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Has it been difficult to focus on, say, fashion and design and then interior design and put them together? Or do they play hand in hand for you?
No, I think fashion and interiors do play hand in hand. I mean, historically, if you look at the history of design, particularly related to interiors and fashion, the proportion and scales of rooms often reflected the proportion and scale of fashion, So if you look at like Versailles, for example, and Marie Antoinette, and she had all those huge dresses. Well, there's a reason why the sofas were, as long as they were, and that the rooms were as big as they were. It was because the dresses needed to kind of proportionately balance. And same with a lot of mid-century furniture. You had like the Dior look of those full skirts. So a lot of the mid-century sofas were quite long because, the clothes were not nearly as petite as they are now.
When you look at the icons historically, who do you look at to say, hey, that's inspiration to me? Would it be Alexander McQueen? Would it be?
I think it's evolved. Having grown up on the prairies in Winnipeg, my only avenue or outlet, I should say, to the design world really was through fashion television or In Style or Fashion File with Tim Blanks. And so I had a large obsession with Galliano and Christian Lacroix when I was in high school. And Lacroix mainly because of the color theory, and then with Galliano, it was just really the theatrics and the dramas of his presentation that were really appealing. But then when I went to university and at Ryerson in Toronto, I mean, there was a number of the higher end shops that had a lot of these international designers in them. And I used to go to Holt Renfrew on the weekends as a student and look at all the designers' clothes, and I would like turn them inside out and figure out how they were constructed, because I thought it was important to learn that. And so Gautier was somebody I was fascinated by as far as a construction point of view.
What about Gianni? Gianni or Halston?
Versace? Yeah. Well, there was a period, like, I think, sort of at the high point in the 90s with like the supermodels and a lot of the embellishment and everything. I think, when he did that whole series of the safety pins and the buckles, the kind of bondage dresses, at that time, it was something really fresh and new, But I later, in my later years in university, I had gone to a Valentino boutique, and I was just like astounded at the quality of the fabrications and the just the simplicity of the construction, but the everything about the designs were really more to do with the fabrics. And so I became quite obsessed with textiles in that respect. And there was this refined elegance. So I think it just has sort of shifted over the years. And a lot of people have kind of likened my designs to Albertas, who just passed away of COVID recently, which was so sad.
Valentino. Ooh.
Yeah. But when he served his tenure at Lanvin, I mean, me and my little Canadian hovel, he and I were actually doing a lot of the same detailing at the same time. Like I was using a lot of grosgrain ribbon and exposed zippers, and very very coincidentally, his designs were incorporating those sorts of trademarks as well. So
when Ed Hardy
I felt a certain kindred spirit with him.
When Ed Hardy was around, how often would people ask, "Are you guys related?"
Yeah, well, a lot of people, actually, it was quite funny because people will still, if I introduce myself and I run into them meet them on the street or something and introduce myself, they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I have some of your t-shirts." And and I'm like, "Yeah, okay, well, thanks, that's great." Yeah, we're often confused. The interesting thing is that Ed Hardy is not actually a person.
It is Christian Audiger, isn't it? That's his
It
real
is, yeah. And from what I recall reading that he died of a brain tumor or something. And the brand ended up folding because I don't think it's operating anymore, as far as I know.
How does a brand stay sustainable for a long period of time? Obviously, at one point, those Christian Audiger shirts were going for $300, $400 for rhinestones on it. And now you can get at the time you could get an Ed Hardy shirt at Walmart or Zellers for.
Yeah.
How does someone sell off their brand like that and just say whatever?
Well, I guess, I suppose, like, it comes down to licensing, really. And if you sell the brand off to another, I remember there was a lot of controversy when Pierre Cardin did this, because Pierre Cardin was obviously known as an haute couture designer, and then he licensed his brand to produce dress shirts and stuff for the masses, and you could find them at Sears at the time. And a lot of people thought that he had kind of sold out, but he, I think, made like 300 million euros or something off of the deal. So, maybe for him, it was more about, I think what, it's sort of this opposing tension, right? Because there's a fine balance between the creative and the commercial. And in order to really support the creative, you have to have the commercial side of things to be able to underwrite it, because not a lot of people buy the creative stuff.
You're 100% right on that. No.
So that's why companies like Chanel and Prada, 80% of their sales come from their licensed products, like fragrances and accessories and cosmetics.
Have you ever thought about going into that avenue, the fragrance, the cosmetic side?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I think, this is, I guess the licensing side of things is, often driven by the creative, right? So it's Prada's shows or the couture shows of Chanel that really drive, the masses who can't afford those things to. So it's sort of a brand driver. And I don't think I'm a very good brand
driver
person, a brand driver.
You are though, Paul.
It's probably one of my weaknesses where I'm not a very good self-promoter or marketer. I just
Well, you let your product speak. You let the people, if they really enjoy it, they share it and they talk about
it. I mean, we've amassed quite a loyal following over the last, I guess it's going to be 19 years this fall. And, I think one of the things that my clientele, at least what they've articulated to me, is when they don't feel like they're just buying my pieces. They feel like they're buying into more than just the clothing, that it's philosophy and I guess a social concept as opposed to, a commercial brand in a way.
How much of your demographic is Calgary based, or your audience and your clients?
Well, I guess I don't know. I've never really evaluated it. I mean, obviously more recently it's largely been local, although we have been shipping a lot, cross country and into the US, and we have clients in the UK and Germany, but I would say maybe 35 or 40% might be Calgary based.
I love biography.
It's a lot of word of mouth. That's generally how my brand's been driven, is primarily word of mouth.
Yeah. I love biographies and autobiographies and documentaries. So you see like Carl Lagerfeld, you see YSL's documentary. How much of somebody's sale is the story of who they are and what they stand for?
Yeah. Well, I would say a good percentage of it, honestly. I think that's always been an internal conflict for me, is so much of fashion is smoke and mirrors, and the public perception of reality is much different than the reality, I think. If you go to like the Hermes factory where they make the Birkin bags, it's in like one of the seediest areas of Paris. And nobody would ever believe that, this luxury international brand is producing their bags out of there. And I think that, much of fashion is very much like that. I've toured a number of the factories in France because we were looking at moving our production over to France or Italy. And I met with one factory who produces a large percentage of the clothes for Chanel. And for really, they had all these amazing stories about when they worked with Dior or Galliano at Dior and Yves Saint Laurent when he was alive. And they're practically in the middle of a farmer's field somewhere. I drove by it 3 times before I realized that was the actual factory. And it constitutes maybe about 50 French women who are like maybe 2nd or 3rd generation, like they train as apprentices, right? And they produce all the clothes for the entire globe for these brands. And yeah, it's really quite something.
It puts things in perspective, what it really is reality.
It really does. Yeah.
It's almost like Instagram versus reality.
Very much so. Yeah.
Paul, growing up, was it different for you or was it odd? Because if you grew up in the prairies loving fashion, I would think, especially where you're from, were people nice to you?
No.
No, yeah, because that's what I was gonna figure out. I said,
well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if I have a skewed perception of my my childhood. I mean, I would say like I was definitely ridiculed and made fun of throughout most of my primary and secondary school years. Because a lot of my interests were not the same as other people.
and for the listeners, what would the prairie interests be, or the people around you at that time versus?
Well, I guess, I would say maybe they were more sports oriented. Like arts was not a predominantly, I don't think it was a predominant thing really. And I would say, I mean, it's certainly changed a lot. Arts has become obviously more widely recognized and important within educational institutions now than it ever was when I was growing up. But I also feel like I existed in a bit of a bubble. Like I just viewed my interests and my abilities as it just was what it was. Like I never, I don't think I ever felt conflicted about pursuing them. It wasn't like I was embarrassed to kind of try to pursue them or felt like I needed to hide those interests at all. In fact, when I was in high school, I took home economics, and I used to, in my final year of high school, I actually did my academics at one high school, and then I would drive across the city during my lunch hour, and I went to another school to do a vocational program that was specifically geared to fashion design, and my school district actually paid for me to go and do that. And at the time, it was one of the only fashion design programs at a high school level that was offered in the country. And so when I entered university at Ryerson, my first year was almost like it felt repetitive to me because I had done so much of it in advance of my studies there.
I'm happy they have that out there. I mean, even in Alberta, we have Olds College they have some fashion programs out there. And I was so proud to see that a few years ago. I saw that and I was like, this is what we need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to Winnipeg's credit, like back in the 40s, Winnipeg used to be sort of the fashion capital of Canada. That's why there was like such a huge Bay store and such a huge Eaton's, and there was Holt Renfrew. It's because everything used to come up through the Mississippi to the rivers, right? And where the forks meet. And so that was often how transport was done. So there were a lot of clothing manufacturers, like the somewhat disgraced Nygaard brand, and Silver Jeans, and I mean denim was actually a really big. I remember. I think it was Victoria Beckham, if I'm not mistaken, actually went and had some of her jeans manufactured in Winnipeg, and Rock and Republic did too, because they had such a big offering there. So
that was a brand, by the way, Rock and Republic and Willie Morass. Those brands were at the top.
Yeah. 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 So Winnipeg did have a lot of history as far as manufacturing was concerned. I'm not sure, how, you know, like where it is right now, as far as the level of, I don't think it's at the same level that it used to be.
Paul, are people purchasing more of small pieces now? Are you finding that through this pandemic? People would buy a scarf, and a really good scarf versus
It was interesting when the lockdown was on, we often had clients buying accessories for friends, almost just as like pick-me-up gifts, which I thought was really lovely. And also the scarves actually became popular because they look really good on Zoom calls. So people wanted something around their neck, whether it was a necklace or a scarf. They only had to be dressed from the waist up, But then as things began to open up, I found that things shifted a bit, and people started looking more for sort of, I guess, more sophisticated basics, like a classic jersey dress that they could throw a jacket or a coat, like a novelty jacket or coat over, that became almost like what I refer to as like workhorse pieces. They were staple items in your wardrobe that you could put on, that was comfortable, and you didn't feel like you were wearing sweatpants, So I found, and the lengths started to change too. Like a lot of people were asking for like maxi skirts or maxi dresses because they were almost like house dresses in a way from back in the like 70s, and so, and then, as the cooler months started to emerge and people were doing more outdoor dining or, having socially distanced gatherings in their backyard, it became more about having like a novelty coat or a jacket, because you never stayed anywhere long enough to actually take one off. So, you could justify, I say that you can justify owning 15 coats in Calgary regardless, because the weather changes like every 15 minutes. But particularly now, you can have such a variety of coats for different reasons, whether it's going to a friend's house for dinner or, the idea of throwing on like a beaded bomber jacket with jeans and a t-shirt just because it makes you feel good, even if you're just running to the grocery store. I do think that there is that that kind of shift because people have been so restricted in so many other areas in their life. It's almost very similar to Japanese culture in a way, like with the Harajuku girls, who would, their culture is so restrained that was their way of, I guess, expressing themselves in a creative way that couldn't be restricted. And so I think, obviously to a lesser degree, that is somewhat what I've been observing over the past year.
Paul, you do so much for our community. So first off, thank you on that.
No.
How did you get involved with Not in My City and help create the brand it is today? It is beautiful.
Well, Paul Brandt and I have been friends and collaborated with one another for, might be even close to 10 years now. We initially met when he was headlining for the Stampede. I think it was during their centennial. And I basically rebranded his image with his fashion for all of his performances and public VIP and press appearances. And then he and I have just collaborated creatively since then. And then at the time that Not in My City launched, it was the 15-year anniversary of my business, and we were going. I had this idea that I wanted to do a float in the Calgary Stampede Parade, and I wanted to have stage a live fashion show during the Stampede Parade.
While it's moving.
Well, it's moving. Yeah, that was my idea. And then I wanted Paul to play live on the float. That was my whole idea. And then we found out that there was a bunch of like kind of logistical restrictions that people couldn't actually move on the float. so then we thought of having like a Stampede party, and we were going to do that at the Dean House. And so I wanted Paul to perform at that. And then he and I had met about it, and we were talking, and he was telling me about the, issues that our city and province were experiencing with regards to human trafficking, and that it was becoming quite which was shocking to me because, I was more familiar with it in places like Cambodia, for example. But it hadn't occurred to me that it was happening in our own backyard, So rather immediately, the whole thing shifted to a fundraising event for Not in My City. And that was when the charity was born. And so in discussions with the formation of the charity, it seemed that merchandise can be an extension of a brand's identity. And so we initially started with a scarf that I had designed for the charity and a bandana. And that was because we had launched it around Stampede. And so the guys traditionally would wear the bandana, although they are quite unisex in my opinion. I thought it could be the catalyst for starting a conversation. And so, if somebody says, "Oh, I love your scarf," it's an opening introduction to be able to talk about the issue and the charity. So that was sort of how the products got developed.
Why was it a yellow flower? What was the significance?
So the yellow rose represents a couple things. One, traditionally yellow roses are representative of friendship. But the one reason that, roses are kind of interesting in the sense that they're pretty, but they also have thorns, right? So there's this kind of juxtaposition of beauty and something gnarly along with it. And I thought that was quite indicative of this issue. And but more from a visual perspective, yellow, you can see it coming from like a mile away.
Oh yes.
And it's not a very easy color for people to wear, typically. So that's why we sort of infused a lot of blacks and grays and whites with the yellow so that it becomes more of an accent color, but it quite pops and stands out. And that was really to create this idea that it's not an easy conversation to talk about. And so just like it's not an easy color to wear, that there's that kind of harmony between those ideas. So that was sort of how the development came around.
And it's blown up in our city, and I'm happy that I didn't know about what was going on either. So it's nice to hear something different. Well, not nice, and it's nice.
And they've been making incredible inroads, not just within our own province, but they've had, conversations on a national level, because it's a traveling kind of issue, and, very, I'm not the only one now who's involved in creating products. We've managed to foster relationships with a number of local and independent brands who have really had an interest in the charity and wanting to be involved with raising awareness and funds for the programming and education. And so, Kat Marks, who does leather work, and the Friday Sock Company was also involved. Poppy Barley, which is a shoe company. They do leather goods as well. But yeah, they've all kind of come alongside and wanted to participate. So I sort of loosely operate as kind of the creative director, I guess, of their merchandise, and just giving my 2 cents of how to keep it all cohesive.
How do you keep as a creator and a director, did you ever look at saying, hey, we should start doing masks now as well? And when is there a place where you say, okay, this is out of our realm, we should not go here? As a creator and a creative, sometimes we can get, I can do that, I can do that, I can do this, and then we stray away from who we really are. How do you?
Yeah, well, when the pandemic first started, a lot of people said, you should start making fashionable masks. And that really didn't sit well with me. I didn't feel like it was in line with my personal philosophy and branding, because I don't know. And this is no disrespect to other fashion brands who have done this, but I just thought it seemed a bit off to be profiting off of off of a health crisis. That just didn't really resonate with me. So I thought if I was going to develop a mask line, it really needed to have a more humanitarian purpose to it. And so there's a nonprofit that I partner with in Rwanda, and where the women are vocationally trained to sew in addition to providing for their holistic needs. And Rwanda had gone into lockdown like much of the rest of the globe. And, their livelihood was really based on their sustainability to produce things. So the charity was actually able to facilitate with the Rwandan government for the women to be able to set up a shop to be able to produce masks. So we would do these FaceTiming, going to the marketplace and buying the traditional Katenge cloth and then getting them to make the masks, and we would have them shipped over here. And I was selling them online, and 100% of the proceeds or the revenue from the masks had been going back to the charity. And we raised a lot of money as a result of that. And that sat a lot better with me. We were actually able to align the Not in My City brand with the mask production, and we actually produced a bunch of masks for Not in My City embroidered with the rose through the Rwandan project. And it was a really great synergy because a lot of the women are survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking. So the fact that, the charity here was partnering with a nonprofit there, I think that was there was something really beautiful about that.
Oh, I love that. Paul, for the young people that want to be you, what is some inspiration you can leave us with here today?
Gee.
You're like, thanks, Zach.
Well, I'm not sure if anyone would want to be me. I think it's important to evaluate what your priorities are. I often tell students that, a lot of them glamorize this business and think, oh, well, I want to be a designer and travel all over the world. And, that is like 2% or 3% of the work. The rest of it is a lot of grunt work, and it's a lot of management. And, there's very few, I think, design positions where, all you do is create all day. I don't know if that's realistic anymore. I think a lot of that, at least not on a large scale level. Like if you want to have, if you value family and they all live in Calgary, then, you're never going to be an international designer. Like you need to contextualize what your priorities are. Or if you love pattern making or draping, like there's no shame in becoming a pattern maker or a draper for another brand. So I think it's really important to figure out what it is that you're passionate about and what it is that you value in your personal life, because I don't believe that one's life should ever be dictated or run by their professional career. It used to be that way, I think, in our parents' generation. They used to work to live, but or vice versa. I'm not sure what that saying is.
And now the pendulum has swung.
I think so, and that's and it's very apparent, with millennial and Gen Z, that they value authenticity. They value the quality of their work environments. They value relationships, and they value social responsibility, and they like diversity in all that. And so, I think the idea of these like 9 to 5 clock in, clock out sort of work environments have really fallen by the wayside. It's I don't think that that's something that this next generations really would ever they would rather make lower wage and have a higher quality of life. And I think that that's where there was a bit of a difference before, is that people often like work like dogs to make tons of money.
But look at their personal life.
And their personal life was like nothing, So, and, to their credit, I would say a younger generation has been able to figure out how they can, by their standards and terms, have a really high standard of living, doing what they love, or, being entrepreneurial. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we see so many entrepreneurs in this younger generation is because when a lot of them graduated from school, it was around the, like the market crash in 2008, let's say. And most of them, like there wasn't opportunity that existed for them when they graduated. And so they had to create the opportunity. And it was very similar circumstances, I think, back in like the stock market crash of the 1920s, is that some of the most creative movements came out of, the fact that there was not opportunity that existed. They had to create it.
And in the 80s, you had the oil boom, and that's where you saw a lot of parents.
Well, and I do think, I don't know. I years ago, I gave a keynote address at the Chamber of Commerce. I actually found that quite amusing because I come from 4 generations of bankers and accountants, and I was the one who was chosen to give this speech. But, the thing that I have really observed living in Alberta is that there is something, I don't know if it's the generational lineage of the province, but there is a pioneering spirit here, and there are more entrepreneurs, I think, or at least more people willing to try to create here, because a lot of stuff didn't exist, so they had to create it, and that dates back to really the formation of Alberta's history and Calgary's history.
Thanks so much for today, Paul.
Sure. It was nice to see you.
Yes, finally. And we will get together once all this is done. I do want to come by and see you. Are you on Ford Street, or where are you?
No, close, very close. I'm my studio's in the Manchester Industrial Park area. So we're just kind of almost behind Henninger Toyota. It's actually like the brewery district, really.
Harley Belt.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you go there often, or did you?
I often stop at Dandy on my way home, or cabins just down the road, and there's 2 other ones just around the corner. But Dandy's one of my favorite. I just like their branding, and they have good snacks and stuff. So.
Oh, the food's great there. Yeah, I've been there once or twice. That's heading into Inglewood, right?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Have a great day.